I'm Diane, and today is August 10th, the day after the 75th anniversary of the dropping of the second nuclear bomb on Japan at the end of World War II at Nagasaki. The dropping of those two nuclear bombs on Japanese cities, killing over 300,000 people, had been completely unnecessary, as Emperor Hirohito was already negotiating the terms of surrender through the Vatican, thanks to General Douglas MacArthur's highly successful naval blockade. This action of dropping the nuclear bombs was designed by the British Empire and carried out by President Harry S. Truman to send a message to the world that at least one nation was willing to unleash the end of civilization, thereby making the case for a one-world government. I'm here in Chinatown at the statue of Confucius, not because I don't know the difference between China and Japan, but because, as Helga Zepp-LaRouche has been warning for months, the rhetoric from our Armageddonist Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and wackos like Steve Bannon, has created a situation where we are facing the possibility of an actual hot war with China over the coming months leading into the November elections. Both President Trump and sleepy Joe Biden have decided to use China as a whipping boy to score points with the American people in the elections. Although President Trump initially established a good relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping, which was critical for President Trump's excellent negotiations with Kim Jong-un of North Korea. Now all of that is jeopardized. Senator Chuckles Schumer, as I like to call him, as the mouthpiece for the pro-war rogue intelligence agencies, is even more fanatically anti-China than Steve Bannon, another reason for my campaign against him in the 2022 elections. So I thought I would share with you a little bit about Chinese history and culture, by which I hope to make clear why President Trump was 100% correct when he said he wanted to have good relations with China and good relations with Russia. About Confucius. He was born in 551 BC, about 80 years before Socrates. One of the most famous sayings of Confucius is, "Don't do to others what you do not want them to do to you." An expression which might indicate that Confucianism is highly compatible with Christianity. In his Book of Rites, Confucius says the following about music: "Animals know noise, but not modulated sound, and the masses of common people know modulated sound, but they do not know music. It is only the virtuous man who can know music." Confucius believed that music was the pathway to attain harmony with the way of heaven, and that the way of heaven was to properly order one's emotions in order to act in a righteous and pious manner. This commitment to a noble conception of mankind shaped a very advanced culture, which resulted in major scientific advancements, making it possible for China already in 300 BC to have 9 cities of over 100,000 people each. According to author Robert Trout, already in the 2nd century BC, the Chinese city of Xi'an had 500,000 people. It had an observatory, and it had a scientist who had put forward the hypothesis that the Earth was spherical and not flat. By comparison, the largest cities in Europe 1,000 years later or more were Florence and Venice, which each had only 90,000 people. Before 500 BC, China had developed the blast furnace to be able to produce iron tools. And by 119 BC, the Han Dynasty had created 46 iron casting bureaus to produce plowshares, knives, axes, saws, and even toys. In Europe, the first blast furnaces were not developed until explorers brought the discovery to Europe from China in the 1300s. China had developed steel by 700 AD, which allowed them to further advance agriculture, including using very precise seed planting tools, which allowed them to produce anywhere from 2 to 10 times more food per acre than European farmers until about 800 years later. There's much more. It's a long history, but I encourage you to research it yourself. This history of Chinese discovery should make you reflect upon the racism of the notion that if China is making scientific breakthroughs, they must have stolen the technology from someone else. I might also give you insight into why Benjamin Franklin was an avid student of Confucius and used to publish the Confucian Analects in his newspaper. Am I saying that China never took any trade secrets from Western production? No. But we also borrowed heavily from Chinese discoveries and inventions. That's just how human progress works. In 1200, you had the Mongolian invasion, which set China back quite a bit. And 600 years later, in the 1840s, while Chinese steel producers were visiting Kentucky to share their scientific breakthroughs with the Americans, the British were launching the Opium Wars to destroy China by getting them addicted to drugs to keep them backwards and impoverished. Does that sound familiar? After that, it was continuous war against China from Britain, later from Japan. In World War II, China was our ally, and China lost about 30 million people during that period. After that, because of the death of Franklin Roosevelt before the war ended, Harry S. Truman came in, and he was willing to overturn everything that FDR intended for the post-war world. And a new geopolitical divide was created with the so-called Iron Curtain of Winston Churchill, the communist versus non-communist division of the world, which led to several bloody wars, which nobody won. Even the Korean War has not ended officially to this day. Then in the 60s, China was immiserated under its own cultural revolution of Mao Zedong, which threw the Chinese people into grinding poverty and despair. Study of Confucius was outlawed, as was Beethoven and Mozart and scientific progress. The Cultural Revolution didn't really end until the death of Mao in 1976, although President Nixon's visit in 1972 was crucial to establish U.S. relations with China. After that, and here is what the anti-China racists don't want you to know, Deng Xiaoping began a very deliberate path to reverse the evils of the Cultural Revolution, including sending several hundreds of thousands of Chinese students to American universities and reviving the study of so-called Western classical music and science, and very importantly, the study of Confucius. This is why, in the last 30 years, China was able to go from being a poor, unhappy place to lifting 850 million people out of poverty. And this is why the Chinese Communist Party has an over 90% approval rating from the Chinese people. So when you hear Secretary Pompeo talking about the good Chinese people and the terrible Chinese Communist Party, don't buy into it. I'm not going to argue that China is perfect or that certain practices in China would or should be accepted in the United States. There are also things that we do in the United States like allow millions of people to be addicted to drugs that China would never tolerate. We're different nations with different histories and different virtues. However, these differences can be a source of strength. And given that our two nations are the largest producer nations in the world, if we combine forces, we can stop the COVID pandemic and we can eradicate poverty worldwide. Do you know who doesn't want that? The British Empire. This is why I am supporting President Putin's proposal for an urgent P5 summit of the leaders of the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council. That is the United States, Russia, China, the UK, and France. President Trump has already spoken with Putin about this. This group of leaders is capable of solving virtually any crisis which confronts us without war. The president of China, Xi Jinping, is a student of Confucius. Perhaps you can now appreciate why that is significant.